Assalamu alaikum and good evening. Today we are here to discuss about Professor Abdul Karim and his works on coins. I have here with me a very distinguished guest from Canada. He is Dr. John D.L., who calls himself a private scholar, but he is quite well known in the scholarly world for his writings on coins. So I would first go to Professor Dell. What brings you here, Dr. Dell?
Well, thank you, Professor. It's certainly good to be here. And the reason for my being in Bangladesh at this time is to participate in two events, one in Dhaka and one in Chittagong, that are celebrating the life and the works of Professor Abdul Karim.
Yes, Professor Abdul Karim was, of course, we should have started this program with homage, for our respectful homage to our teacher. And we have Professor Mufakharul Islam, who was also a student of Professor Karim and a colleague of Professor Karim. And we are very grateful to this man, great man I should say, who really made a name for himself as well as for scholarship. That means he was a pioneer in the field of medieval Bengal history, the history of the Muslims in Bengal.
Yes.
And I'm sure I should introduce also Dr. Dale a little bit. You were here also in Dhaka for some time earlier.
Yes, I was, Professor. I was here in the 1990s, about 1994 to 1997, with the Canadian High Commission. And my work was to supervise the CEDA program, the development program. But my hobby was to participate in the Asiatic Society of Bengal and to try to keep up numismatic and historical studies.
Yeah, I remember that during that period, we very often used to meet you at the Asiatic Society. And when did you meet Professor Karim first?
As far as I recollect, my first meeting was in Chittagong, which was his home city. I had gone on business, and I stole a little time to go to the University Museum to see the coin collection. And the curator there, Professor Shamsul Hussain, took the trouble to introduce me to Professor Karim, who had already known because of his writings and his books. And we had a number of good sessions together, going over the history of the area, the coins, and his experience in the field. Yeah.
And you yourself has quite a great interest in coins. And I understand you had your PhD from Wisconsin, and your thesis was which was published later on from Oxford, entitled "Living Without Silver." Would you tell us something about the subject that you actually dealt in your PhD thesis?
Thank you. It was actually the story of the economies of the pre-modern period. And what I realized was that all of my colleagues who were modern and post-classical economists had it quite easy because, of course, there were numerous sources for them to use in their work, most of them records, etc. But for the period that Dr. Abdul Karim and I took an interest in, there were no records, there were very few. And the histories that had been left were of uncertain reliability. So one had to go to another source of evidence. And he went to epigraphs, which is to say the beautiful inscriptions that are often inscribed on mosques and other public buildings. And both of us went to coins, which, unbelievable as it may seem, are even today found in large numbers during excavations.
Yep.
And after the rain has washed away buns. So one can look at the inscriptions on the coins, compare them from one place to another, and start to draw conclusions about the prosperity, the state of the economy, and even cultural allusions that you find on it. He was certainly a master in this, and I was happy to be a student who could follow his lead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's true that the coins, though they are very small, but they tell a lot of the period in which they were struck.
They tell a big story.
The study of coins is, in the scholarly world, we call it numismatic, and Professor Karim was a numismatist of the first order, I should say, and for this book, the Corpus of the Muslim Coins of Bengal, he was awarded the Akbar Silver Medal by the Numismatic Society of India. So, what is your impression about this book itself?
Well, first of all, one has to understand that it's easy to make wrong assumptions, to have wrong ideas about what you see when you're looking at ancient things. What was beautiful about his work, and this book in particular, was how very meticulous he was about recording his observations and then letting you know what was all the writing that had gone on previously that would give the reader an idea of how to double-check his own opinions. And secondly, he was quite careful to provide you with the material you needed to follow up. He would give long lists of the coins that had been found and what their details were. So actually, it was invaluable for his own observations, but it also served as a source material for others who could do their own work based on his observations.
And I'm sure you know this book was first published in 1960, and it is being again published in 2014. That is about 54 years later.
Yes.
Do you think it still holds the ground?
Well, I think one of the ways that we judge a book is by the influence it has had. And of course, time does not stand still, and there have been a number of new discoveries since Professor Karim wrote his book. I think the important thing is that the methodical way he went about the topic is a model, which regrettably is not often observed in the more modern books. And secondly, although there are much broader catalogues available now, because there have been many new discoveries in the field, none of them, regrettably, approaches it with the methodical, painstaking, footnoted way that he has. So even if you have the modern catalogues with the latest discoveries, you still have to put his book side by side to learn the background.
Exactly.
And
yes, I'm sure Professor Islam would agree with me that Dr. Karim was a very meticulous researcher. What would you say about him?
I was his student in the undergraduate classes. That was way back in 1962. He used to teach us medieval history, and at that time we had a large number of very serious, competent teachers, and Professor Karim was undoubtedly one of the best of the lot. He taught us for about a year before he went abroad for his second PhD degree. And we could see that how serious, how committed he was as a teacher. And the same commitment he is mentioning about his book on the coins. And he was used to be very thorough. he used to have a particular method which made his teaching very effective. We used to listen to him with quite a bit of attention. Of course, at that time there were not many students, but he was very successful, competent as a teacher. And anybody of our time who was your student, they will ask me, they will agree with me that he was a very good teacher.
Very successful teacher.
Very successful teacher. And that is what I know about Karim best as a teacher. Later, when I joined Chittagong University, I became his colleague, the youngest colleague in the department. But I never felt that I was the youngest. We used to have free access to him, and he used to tell us how to handle the class lectures, how to handle the students. And later when I went abroad, he gave me some idea as to how to proceed about doing a PhD thesis, which was very useful. And then I came back to Chittagong University when he was the head of the department. After some time, I didn't stay there for long. But once again, that gave me an opportunity to develop further the relationship which I had with him as a student. Of course, there was this relationship continued because I used to go to Chittagong from time to time. He used to come to Dhaka. And the same seriousness which he showed as a teacher was there in the field of other research other than coins and inscriptions. He knew Arabic and Persian, as you know. Very well. And he used to be very methodical, and he used to write what we may call the total history, history in all its dimension. And the another thing, up to 1972, Professor Karim wrote mostly, almost exclusively in English.
Yeah.
But after 1972, following the trend of that time, he started writing in Bangla.
Yeah, and he wrote many books in Bangla.
And most of his works on the history are in Bangla.
Actually, the history of the Sultans of Bengal.
Yeah.
That is.
He started writing also on the Mughals, Mughal rule also.
Under Mughals also. And he wrote a small book on the history of the Muslims of the subcontinent as well.
I see.
Yeah, and I think towards the end of his life, he got a professorial fellowship at the Institute of Bangladesh Studies at Rajshahi, where he spent about 3 years, I think. And
very productive time there.
And he produced 2 volumes. He had the idea of producing 5 volumes of history of the Mughals in Bengal. But he produced 2, he could finish 2 volumes. And they are so exhaustively had gone through the sources, coins, as well as you have a lot of chronicles in the Mughal period.
Indeed.
And he has meticulously gone through all of them and has put up 2 very voluminous volumes, I should say, on the Mughals' history. But he could not finish his projected 5 volumes, where he would. These 2 volumes are mainly on political history. He wanted to do with the economic history as well as on the social history of the Mughal period. But his name in this field of scholarship actually is for his social history of the Muslims of Bengal up to 1538. I'm sure you were aware of that book.
Yes.
And, what is your opinion about that? That he is a pioneer in the field?
Well, I think he was part of a broader trend away from political history to the history of people and their lives. I have to say that we had the same trend in North America as well during that period, and it says something about the fact that he was so well attuned to the currents elsewhere in places like India and in Europe and America, that he understood the value of it. People's tastes change, and we're not so thrilled with the idea of a chain of emperors and kings, but especially nowadays with our electronic connections, we're very fascinated with people. And in a sense, he was a pioneer in letting us know how people lived and what their circumstances were in earlier days.
Yeah, and I remember I had the opportunity of seeing both this book as well as the social history in the manuscript form. And when we were students of the MA class, and I joined the university as a lecturer immediately after my MA result, and he first gave me the social history to go through it and sort of a proofreading the manuscript,
right,
more or less, and I could see that how deep he has gone into the sources. And you know, my first initiation in research was at his hand, and one day he found a new inscription has been published about the Tughlaq's invasion of Bengal. A new inscription has been published, and he gave me the inscription from the Epigraphia Indo-Muslimica and said that now you analyze it and publish an article. That was my first article in the journal. So I can say that he initiated his proteges into research, and I don't know whether we are worthy of proteges or not, but still it is he who initiated us into research. Now we go into a break, and we would come back short.